and welcome to Emerging Voices Unite Live. We are talking about ideas that scale. I'm Nikki Estes, where we are transforming ideas and experts into real world impact. We're designing powerful brand experiences, connecting you with industry thought leaders, and delivering marketing systems that help your impact grow faster. Today, I have Robert Yeager with me. He is the controller at Telling Industries. He has 10 years in the manufacturing space, a P&L ownership. He works in cost accounting and forecasting. He has an SAP based product costing models. Whew, this is a position that I'm learning here.
Okay.
You you have a background at Continental and quality systems. So today we're going to unpack what leaders need to understand beyond the numbers, what finance is actually telling you about your business. Robert, please help me to do a better job of this.
Sure. Within financials within manufacturing. Right. So a lot of times people look at accounting and finance and they're like, oh, you just report the numbers, but that's not the whole story, right? So part of the issue is that profit and loss statement, especially in a lot of companies, the business that's going on, right? We know world conflicts that are going right now. If you're looking at a month to month and you're just focusing on the accounting portion of the data, profit and loss statement lags, right? So if I look at my sales trends, if I look at my costs, I look at things like that, it doesn't paint a picture that you need in order to work with business leaders. Somebody that I follow and look at is Anders Lou Lindberg, talks about business partnering. So I actually had a an executive at Contitech that actually described it as being a co-pilot, right? So pilots running the plane, things like this. The co-pilot controller is generally there to support that, right? And I look at it the same way. A lot of times people say, "Oh, accountants don't want to, do this, do this." In my mind, a controller's job is to evaluate risk and tell business leaders, where the risks are, what are we doing here, and what are the appropriate risks that you could take to grow the business, and what directions do you need, and to go and look at that as well. One of those things too is a lot of times, people push revenue, right? And they're pushing it and saying, hey, we need to grow the business, we need to do this, but you need to create profitable revenue, right? Every business operates in order to make a profit. If you're not profitable, you can't continue as a going concern. So part of that from an accounting standpoint, and while the P&L is very important for this, is that it walks through and you look at that profitability within that to make sure that you're profitable moving on. So that goes through the whole entire department. It doesn't matter if you're, a smaller company, a larger company. The goal is if you're not doing your job from an accounting standpoint, it might go and give business leaders the wrong picture, right? So if I'm not doing my job, then the business leader can't do their job properly because they don't have the right data to make those decisions. So lots of different things that sit there. In my mind, one of the most important things is cost accounting, especially manufacturing. You could say that even in like a restaurant space, a retail space, understanding what your products cost and what you sell them for to really understand margin. And we won't get into, we'll kind of do a broad overview because I could probably go deep into the details. But if you don't understand the profitability of your products and what you need to price them at, you don't know, what market's going to go into, what, new products can I develop, things like this. So while business leaders, different functions within the organization, executive team, have their different components, controller, finance, and accounting, they put numbers to what those ideas are, right? And a good financial professional will be able to look at it from a financial perspective and then understand the questions to ask to make sure that they understand what that is. So,
So tell me, we know that there's some economy disruption right now that's happening, and people they need more sales, right? They need more money to come in. They have
Sure.
clients that they've worked with for maybe years, but they need to increase their costs to be able to cover the balance. What
Yep.
do you suggest? Like, how do you figure out how to do that?
So, I mean, there's things that you can pass along, right? We all know that there's an increase in oil, right? So that's real. Price of diesel, I think, has gone up like 25-30%. There's things that you pass along, but I think what's really important is you can't just react. You have to have tools in place so that when things do happen, I mean, especially when you're working in a global environment, right? To have the thought process and say, okay, maybe I'm a US based business, right? And thinking that you just have things within the US. So we sell steel, right? But steel components are mined all over the world and need to come into the United States. So while some of this doesn't, impact immediately, then it could, increase, these prices. It could increase your shipping costs to your end customer. But the key is that if I'm working with a forecast, for example, I need to have tools to where I can quickly plug something in and say, okay, what's the sensitivity analysis? So if I reduce sales here and increase costs here, and I look at this, what can readily tell me the price increase that maybe I need to have in order to cover those extra costs? So you have to have models and systems in place in order to be able to react quickly. And you also have to understand that a lot of times you're not going to be able to pull that price quick enough to match those costs. Those costs are going up immediately. Your market might not be able to pull that in. So you have to be able to say to your business leaders, hey, this is what we can absorb. This is what might happen. Here's the risk. This is what we need to do to get back on track, in the long run.
Mhm.
And, like we were talking previous to this going on, is that you don't know what the future is going to hold, right? So you need to be able to sit there and understand different scenarios. So you might need to say, okay, if A happens here, B happens here, C happens here, these are the paths that we need to take. And then you need to work with the business leaders to say, okay, am I going to buy ahead on this? Because do I expect the price to go up? So some of this is gut feelings, but gut feelings, as you said, I have 10 years of experience within finance. I mean, these things go on, just different things, right? COVID happened. There's, housing crisis of 2008. There's things that go on that are global economy shifts all the time. The key is having those tools and knowing the right questions to ask and the right leaders to involve within that, so
Mhm.
that when you're making these predictions or these, forecasts, that you're pulling in the right people. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. So then, are these tools that you were taught or that you make, or how does that work in that department?
It depends. I mean, there's lots of things that are out there, right? So, and as you said, I was a SAP expert. I'm working on a type of Microsoft tool now for an ERP. I mean, at the end of the day, there's a lot of different forecasting tools that are out there. But if anybody is in accounting finance, they'll tell you the most flexible tool is Excel. So Microsoft Excel, in my mind, is one of those things that's flexible enough to be able to work with different systems, right? So that was something that I learned. I don't know how long have I been doing it. Been doing this for over 10 years. So back in 2013. So I believe I learned that back in 2013, and it's really flexible. There are people that are more advanced than I that utilize things like Python and I don't know other stuff that's built in. I do have Power BI skills, but at the end of the day, it's pulling in the right information and making sure that you have something that's flexible enough to make adjustments on the fly, right? And I know that there's AI tools out there. I know that there's things, but they all cost money, right?
Right.
And Excel is one of those things that I have a license. I have a Microsoft license. Everybody in the world probably has either Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel. So if you build those skills, it's more along the lines of learning the right questions to ask. So if I'm in manufacturing, for example, do I know the shipping costs? Do I understand what my cost of raw materials is going to be? How does that then flow through and affect my finished goods? If I'm
Mhm.
looking at, sales, do I understand how the sales trends work? And do I understand? I mean, I've been with Telling for about 3.5 months, so I've worked really hard to understand, are there fluctuations within, the selling period within the year, right? Because construction is who utilizes our end product, to where I worked before, it was a lot of industrial, right? So we sold, I don't know, power transmission belts that went on machinery. So that might be a little bit different because you're working with repair and maintenance
Mhm.
teams that you're selling to. Same with, industrial hoses, hydraulic hoses, things like this, as opposed to, hey, now I'm working in the construction industry within the US. So how do the sales work there when somebody's building, I don't know, in the middle of the winter, right? So we sell structural, we sell, drywall, steel framing. So maybe I build the structural when it's nice outside, and then I can work on the drywall when it's, winter, and I've already got the outside of that, built. But there's a lot of things that go into play in that, and it requires leadership like myself to talk to, your sales executives, to your operations leaders, to your, purchasing leaders, things like that, so that you can understand how that's going into it, so that you can build your models and pull in the information that's necessary. So if, whoever's out there watching this, if you're a business leader and you're in manufacturing and your controller is coming to ask you questions, then they're trying to, maybe build these things that are out there.
Mhm. So that they can be able to do the forecasting, so that they can be able to support the business as it grows and
Correct.
decides to scale.
Exactly. Well,
Mhm.
and right. So, and I mean, honestly, there are structured things that you can do, but a lot of times within especially the finance function, there's a lot of ad hoc analysis that you
Mhm.
have to be prepared for. So if you're, I don't know, new to an organization, or you're a leader that maybe is upgrading some of their, tools that they have out there, you want to have somebody gives you an ad hoc analysis. What's nice about that is that once you set that model up, you can just copy, repeat with the new model.
Mhm.
So in my history, and I wish I could have brought some of this stuff with me, but through 10 years at my prior company, I built a lot of that. Now it sits inside of my head. I can recreate that within the Excel spreadsheet. But once you get that base built, you have those tools, and those tools never go away.
Mhm.
So even if you borrow it from somebody else, if you can download certain things from the internet. That's why I like Copilot. You
Mhm.
can say, hey, tell me what this ratio is, and how do I, set these formulas up, and things like that. A lot of Excel. I actually was talking about this recently with one of my employees. A lot of Excel is just algebra, right?
Mhm.
And it's what's the unknown. So I'm just trying to build formulas so that it can plug things in. The numbers matter to us at Telling,
Mhm.
but when you're in finance and accounting, it's not so much the numbers, it's the systems that you build, because people want quick answers. And they need quick answers because they're like, hey, I'm going to buy this piece of machinery, or I'm looking at, replacing this. What is this impact going to have? And generally, they don't have 2 weeks to wait for an answer. Most of the time, they're making quick decisions because if I wait for 2 weeks, maybe the price goes up. If I do this, something broke down, I don't have time to wait. Does it make sense to replace or repair? Those types of decisions need made quickly. So there is a lot of maybe cyclical nature to accounting and finance. So you have
Mhm.
month end close, everybody wants to look at the numbers.
Mhm.
You have budgeting, you have forecast, but you have a lot of ad hoc. So you have to be able to pivot back and forth. And depending on if you're a smaller company, you have a little bit smaller team. So you need to be able to be more flexible, right?
Mhm.
So whereas maybe you're in a larger company, maybe you could say, hey, so and so, I've got a team of, when I was working in a larger company, we had maybe, I don't know, 8 people within, an accounting team, right? So one person could be a financial analyst, and you could hand that off, and that person maybe did fixed assets. When you're on a smaller team, you have to know a lot, right? You have to be, jack of all trades, which I've learned in the past from, a little smaller company that I've worked at. So it's those types of things, knowing the details so that when somebody brings you something, you don't necessarily have to know all the details, but you have to understand the questions asked to draw things out to make sure that people are bringing in the assumptions that are necessary.
So then how does that work with operations? You talk about, finance and accounting hand in
Mhm.
hand. Like, how do you make operations be friendly in that too?
I mean, from an operational standpoint, you're all, as a company, you're all looking for the same thing, right? So operational efficiency, um, you can work with them to kind of say, okay, I don't know, manufacturing, scrap is inherent to all manufacturing, right? Whether it's what we call, process related waste, right? There's scrap that is, within this. I'm doing a run, I need to set up a machine. It's likely that I'm going to scrap some of my raw materials in order to do this. Um, there's machine, things get messed up, pieces get stuck. You need to do this, right? So the key is once you determine, and this is working with your operational partners and saying, okay, I've got the P&L, I've got the accounting. Let me look at what my bottlenecks are, right? Where are my costs high? So I've always said this: you can increase your profitability by increasing sales,
Mhm.
decreasing costs. That's it. There's not really many other levers to pull. And if you look at it at a simplified view that way, and you look, a lot of times P&Ls are broken down to where you have like, sales, cost of goods sold, and then you'll have the costs that sit there within operations, right? So the key is talking to your operations people and saying, hey, where do you need help? The key
Mhm.
is not to force your help on them, because accounting and finance is a very um, it's a service, right? You're serving other people, so you need to make sure that you're not, stepping on toes. You
Mhm.
want to allow people to do their jobs, and you're there for support, right? So you do not run the operations. You need to be back forth and say, okay, business leader, operations leader, I'm here to help you from a financial perspective. Where do you see that you need help? Where do you need answers? And then you
Mhm.
allow them to come and talk to you
Mhm.
to kind of, pull that through, right?
Mhm.
So you have to have willing participants. You have to be able to talk, build that relationship. Sometimes things take longer than others. It just depends on, where you're at within the organization. But if you step in, you say, hey, I know more than, things, because I know that that's a bad equation. It's why when I come into the new organization, I spend a lot of time just getting to know people,
Mhm.
so that you can build that relation. Building the relationship is more important than uh, they're both important. Don't get me wrong. Managing those types of things, but building that relationship is really important so that you can understand and work as a partner with those people.
Mhm. You have to have credibility with them. They have to have seen that you've done something that helped them so that they will trust you for giving more information. So they're pretty much giving you access. Here are all the tools that we think we're supposed to be
Yeah.
using right now. Who are you to tell me that we're not supposed to be? Well, and yeah.
Well, but and at the same point, I mean, I have worked in a factory, but I'm not an engineer. I am not in repair and maintenance. I do not run, a manufacturing facility. So it's important for me to listen to other people to,
Mhm.
to really put my eyes on, right? One of the first things that I did um, within, I don't know, first 2 or 3 weeks is I spent time in a plant, in one of our plants. What was really helpful was that we had, physical inventories. You walk on, you look at the, machinery. What I find crazy sometimes within manufacturing, and I worked 10 years at my previous job. There are people that work within manufacturing that are doing functions that have never seen what's actually going in on the operation side, right? How do you understand the numbers if you don't understand what's behind the numbers,
Mhm.
right? So I can't, understand, hey, what's the costs here? If somebody asks me a question and I don't understand how the process is working, then it doesn't allow me to look at the numbers and tell you, okay, what's causing this,
Mhm.
right? And anytime you're going into a new company or a new, it takes a while to kind of understand what that is. So if you were, I don't know, a new graduate, watching this, or if you're, business leader that's starting in a new company, right, or a new, I don't know, industry, spend the time to really understand what your company is doing to get a good handle, because if you don't know what your company actually produces, what they make, how they sell, how they buy, you can't really tell a story. Our job um, is to be a storyteller, right? The numbers tell a story. The numbers help you tell a story. The key is can you link the pieces together so that if somebody asks you a question, your logic that you're using to say, okay, why am I over and spent here? Well, here's this. And if I don't know what's actually going behind that, I'm not going to be able to find that out. And I'm not going to own my numbers. I like to own everything that sits behind that. And I don't feel comfortable until I know what's sitting behind that. So if you're out here watching, that's the key. If you're a financial professional, learn your business. I mean, it could be banking, right?
Mhm.
Which I absolutely do not want to go into ever. But even within banking, you would have to understand, how is the cash flow coming in? What are the things that I use in order to get the interest that sits there? How does home loans work, or how does a personal loan work? How does that come in so that you could manage cash flow, right? Or manage fees or manage interest and things like this. What are those things and those levers that need to pull? So if somebody says, hey, why are mortgage defaults up here, right? You have to understand the market that you're working in. So
Mhm.
um, concepts are the same, things are, but you should be an expert within the field that you're working in, um, within to be able to really explain finance and accounting to the people that are going to utilize those numbers.
And operations is just one department that you need to be able to tell the story to. You
Mhm.
also have marketing and sales,
Sure.
right? So
Yeah.
you're talking into operations about where costs can be effective, efficient, and productive. But the same as in marketing and sales, they need to increase whatever that looks like. Maybe they need to increase sales. Maybe they need to increase their PR. So how do you approach that department? Is there what's the best way to not have friction there? And I'm sure the first thing you're going to say is building that credibility and relationship, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Go sell for 7 years. So I did insurance sales for 7 years. So Um, but no, 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 don't do that. I don't suggest everybody go and do door to door sales or commission only sales, although that's helpful, because sales is different, outside
Mhm.
sales than inside sales than marketing, right? So you have the different departments, and really understanding what each person is looking for is very helpful, right? Because the way that you're going to fashion your conversations is going to change based on who you're talking to.
Mhm.
So if I'm strictly talking to outside sales, then understanding how their structure is set, right? A lot of times outside sales gets commissions. How, how do I drive this, right?
Mhm.
And that goes also with the commission structure. What are your goals for the organization? Are you trying to drive revenue? Then I do it this way. Am I trying to drive margin? They might tie it to some other metric. But you have to understand what's driving those people, and what's in it for me, right?
Mhm.
There's always something that's in it for that person. People work for money. Let's be honest. Very, very little people don't get a benefit of some kind of monetary benefit that's out of it, right? But at the end of the day, you want to link to something that's higher than that monetary benefit. So the key is to talk to a person to really understand what drives them on that level, right? So it's like you said, it's building that relationship, but it's also then understanding what they're looking for and giving them what they're looking for, not giving them noise behind that, right? So if somebody
Mhm.
says, hey, I want to do sensitivity analysis, I want to see where we're at, how do we drive profitability, and what levels do we have to be at, right?
Mhm.
So it's it's talking to, could be individuals, could be the leaders of the teams. It's understanding, excuse me, it's understanding what they need in order to do their job properly, right?
Hmm.
Some of that starts with, understanding the strategy of the entire company. Hey, what are our goals for this? So framing that within that, but then each individual, portion of that, right? So like you said, there's marketing. Um, are we looking to grow the market? What's our market share? Talking in terms of that. Are our goals to bring visibility? Are our goals to, um, increase our leadership within the market? What are the things there? And honestly, that's one of those things that I would say direct sales is probably one of those things that maybe accounting is less involved in, because we get
Hmm.
to, we do accounts receivable. You do the terms, so you have some interaction, but you probably have the least interaction.
Hmm.
Um, but there's other functions, right? There's purchasing,
Hmm.
there's AP. All of it kind of weaves together
Hmm.
because you're touching every portion of the organization through accounting. Because at the end
Hmm.
of the day, like we said, if a business is not profitable, they can't exist, right?
Right.
So unless you're a startup and somebody's just, being a private equity firm and funneling
Sure.
money in, but that's a little bit different, right? Most businesses that people are working in within my realm, as far as manufacturing or established businesses, so they need to ensure profitability because businesses can't continue if they're not profitable.
Right. They're just a hobby then.
Yeah, hobbies are fun, but
Right, right, right. That can be
not great
completely
if you
fun.
want to make a career, right? So,
Right. So I hear like we are the voices, right? We have our emerging voices and top voices, or amplifying voices. But with that voice, you have to be a storyteller. And it's not just for creators, it's not just marketers, but it sounds like to me the accounting department needs to be one of the strongest storytellers in the entire company. You're building the relationship with the operator, you're building the relationship with the founder. You got to tell, marketing, hey, you can't do this event, but let's talk about what tools you could do to amplify your lead generation and sales. We've got this relationship with operations and marketing, and you need these kinds of numbers. How can we help you to get there? So you're always thinking about what's in it for them,
mhm,
that benefits the company as well.
yeah. Well, and part of that too, and walking through that, sales and operations and
Mhm.
manufacturing are two of your probably very important, right? If I don't sell, I don't have a business. And if I
Right.
don't make products, then I can't complete that and I can't get the money from the sale because I say, hey, I'm going to give you products. So we are truly support. So all of my work is dependent on other people. I can't do my job
Mhm.
unless there's people selling, there's people buying materials, there's people making those materials, there's people going out and selling it, right? So that's why I have to understand everything. It
Mhm.
doesn't. I don't have to be an expert, right? In finance and accounting, we don't have to be experts at purchasing. As I said, I don't have to go. Hopefully, knock on wood, I don't have to go fix machinery because I don't think we would be able to, continue to operate. We have very good people at telling that do that for us. Um, but I need to understand how I need to support them so they can go
Mhm.
and, fix the machinery. How do I, the accounting and finance team is bringing in the cash flow that allows them to do this, right?
Mhm.
So what are those things that I need to do to support that to make sure that, they are continuing to be able to do their job, right? We
Mhm.
pay, accounts payable pays the electricity. Well, if
Mhm.
I don't pay the electricity on time, guess what? We ain't producing anything because they're going to shut it off, right?
Right.
So that's why I said support is really important within that. And then also from that finance and accounting standpoint, talking to those people to help them understand that, hey, we do need to be profitable. That I've always felt this way. I was taught this early in college, is that companies pretty much don't stay flat. They're either growing or they're shrinking. And you want to be on the growing portion. So when you're working with that business leader, you know, sales and I know that a lot of people, sales people are always really optimistic and, I'm going to sell more. I want to do this. And I would not want a salesperson that wasn't that way, right? You absolutely want that growth. How do I support that? How do I rein that in and say, okay, yes, we can grow, but then how do I make sure that we are growing the right way, right? So I can help with that to make sure that, hey, we're bringing in these new customers, we're looking at these markets, we're looking at, expanding this. How does that give us profitable growth? How do we price that? What's the cost that's there so that when we do, enter the market, right? Or maybe we don't enter the market. Maybe this is commoditized, right? And maybe this is not the right way to go. So that's working with like marketing, right?
Mhm.
Saying, okay, what's the market out there for this? What's the, market price for this? This is what we can make it for. This is what we can sell it for. If we scale it at volume, what are the machinery that we have to buy? Do we, go outside and have somebody else do this for it and market it? So, I mean, there's a lot that goes on that sits in behind the scenes that accounting and finance can help with.
Mhm.
So, and part of this too is to ensure that you have the time, right? So, as I said, there are lots of tools out there, but you're evaluating those tools to say, okay, how can I free up my time here so that I can provide more information for the business leaders here, right?
Mhm.
Because we're support. Accounting finance is never going to be like, hey, we've got 50 people in our accounting finance department, said no one ever, right? So you've got to find ways to be very good at utilizing technology so that you can build in that efficiency so you can, really work within that, right? So
Mhm.
that includes, right, telling a story. I like Power BI. Visuals are really good because people can see things. A lot of
Mhm.
times, people you're dealing with are very visual. That allows you to help that. I would say set up, lots of those. A lot of times setting it up front, very good in the back end. Then I just
Mhm.
can feed data at it, and then people can see the picture, right? It's
Mhm.
a lot easier to look at pictures than it is to look at a bunch of lines on an Excel spreadsheet. So that's
Mhm.
part of it too, right? But it's knowing what is important and why am I doing this? What benefit is it providing? A lot of times people in accounting finance produce a ton of reports,
Mhm.
but it's not providing benefits. So we want to make sure that we have good impact that's going
Mhm.
to create actionable decisions. If you're
Mhm.
doing something to produce, I mean, the technology age that we've had is explosion in the information that's available, but why, right? My manager from my in quality, she said, always ask why. Why am I
Mhm.
providing? What is this doing for you that gives you this information? What are you doing with this, right?
Mhm.
So, and the key is to make sure that we're doing the right things that do profitable decisions. So,
Mhm. Anything that would be done has to move the needle forward.
correct.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, sometimes you have to do things in the accounting finance world because it's statutory, right?
Mhm.
So thanks.
Like what?
Well, gap, those report. I mean, if you're working in a smaller company, it's privately held, but you still have, banks. If you're, lending money, there's audits that need to be done. People have to be able to see, what um, you know, what your financials are, right? It has to be presented in a certain way so that, hey, I'm looking at this. These all make sense. Everybody's got, a P&L. Most people have sales, cost of goods sold. They've got, sales and admin costs, and you've got, our, costs here, right? Balance sheet always has assets, inventory, and manufacturing. You've got, cash. I've got my accounts payable and things like that. So you have to be able to structure it in a certain way. That's the
Mhm.
account piece of that, right? So when I do my monthly accounting, there's certain things, especially in larger companies, publicly
Mhm.
traded. So you have GAAP, which is US, and you have IFRS, which is pretty much everybody else in the world. So
Okay.
there are accounting standards that are out there so that when investors go out, they can compare those. So if you buy on the stock market, you see these financials that sit there. They're there on purpose so that people can compare against each company. So when you're working for a larger company, that's a portion of it, is that statutory, and there's a lot of rules out there because there's a lot of rule breakers. So you have a lot of things that are made. Yeah, we're probably I'm old now, right? So Enron in
You're
2000,
good.
So but it drove a bunch of new laws, right? So
Mhm.
every time somebody skirts around certain law, something new is made, and it really falls back into that accounting team. So that's part of that too. So we have to make sure, hey, taxes are filed, this is done this way. So there is that portion of that that might not give value to the business, where it's
Mhm.
not value added work, but it's something that needs to be done, right? Every business has it. Everybody has to pay taxes. Taxes and death, right?
Right.
So,
Yes. They're both musts. Well, and you brought up that rules are only made because they've been broken or they needed to be created. And that just helps everybody. Yeah. It's okay. But
I agree.
the other part, there's some tasks that are done that maybe you can't quantify that they drive revenue, but they should drive the business forward. Keeping things organized, being able to report all of those numbers, the P&Ls to the team, that way they can make decisions on, okay, what do we do next for a product? Do we need to iterate on what we're doing? Do we need to make it differently? Work with a different partner? For how about for marketing? Are there campaigns that we need to do that are differently, or do we need to stop a campaign?
Yeah.
Is our brand visibility strong enough? Are we targeting our ICP well enough? Is our voice from our sales the same voice that is coming out of our technology? Like all of this, it all needs to be aligned. And that time is valuable. So
Mhm.
I wouldn't say that it doesn't necessarily, it is very profitable for the company. I'll just put it that way. Yeah. From
Sure.
our experience, we when we had the technology company, we would spend time learning. Everybody needed to know what the elevator pitch was. Everyone needed to know what the brand promise was, right? So that we could all be aligned. And that time is valuable so that the company can be efficient in the way it presents itself globally. So
Absolutely. Yep.
so so let me take a step and ask about manufacturing. Like, you've got these strong manufacturing leaders out there, and you have reactive ones. How can you separate the two when it comes to finance? What do they do differently?
I would say that strong leaders, just in general, right, are I go back to Seven Habits of Highly Effective People and the
I know
story
that
of
one.
you know that
Hmm.
one? Okay.
Yeah.
So within the beginning of the book, I believe it says there is a difference between a manager and a leader. So the manager is in a forest and they're clearing like jungle, and they've got workers, got machetes. Managers driving them, right, clearing the forest, things like this. And the leader stops, climbs the tallest tree, looks in the forest, and says, "We're headed in the wrong direction." Right? So you can continue to push, do this, but strong clarity of where you're headed is really important, and that's one of those things that I had. Carrie Battenhouse was a control good leader that I learned under in Contitech, and she said you have to know when you zoom out, right? 30,000 foot view, and when you go into the details, and knowing when you have to go back and forth is really important. So part of that, though, is being able to get an idea for what the strategy is moving forward. So you have to be able to see the future. So be it 5 years from now, right? But your employees don't always need to know what that is, but they need to know what their next steps are, right? So if somebody's sitting there and they're waiting for work to do, or they don't know what the next step is, I would say that those leaders, business leaders, period, right? If they don't know what the next steps are, then that creates an issue, because that's when people, get complacent, or they start doing something that they don't have to do because you're not all working towards the same direction.
Hmm.
And that's something in telling that we do well. We know where we want to go. So that's good. We have good leadership that is pushing towards the same direction. I would say that it's a unified step on where you want to go and understanding what you want to do, and then trickling that down to your team, so that the actions that you take to do any kind of improvement, things like this, need to support that overall strategy. So,
Hmm.
and in accounting and finance, you're never setting, I mean, you're going to help set that strategy, but it's likely that you will not set that strategy on your own, right? You will get it from business. Business will trickle it down. It's in your best interest to understand, put numbers to that, so that you can determine, okay, here's the direction we want, put that into the numbers, go through to your forecast or your budget and understand, okay, is that the profitable direction? Is that the right direction for where we want to go? So
Mm-hmm.
I will say that it's really important for accounting and finance, strong accounting and finance leaders directly,
Mm-hmm.
to push back against, political, right? Hey, we need this to be this.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, everybody wants more income, right? Everybody wants to move that bottom line up. So it's important that when you're looking at things that you have reasonable expectations on why that's going to happen. So it's not just the, hey, can we do this? It's, hey, what do we have to do that sits behind this? And that's why knowing what those risks are, watching trending data, stuff like this, so that you can help leadership steer the company in the right direction, right? Current
Mm-hmm.
conflict that we have, increase in gas prices, what do we need to do so we can react, so we can keep the ship on a steady course? So it's
Mm-hmm.
like that's what separates maybe somebody that's coming in, doing the day-to-day stuff, hey, I'm running my accounting and things like this, to a forward-looking leader that says, hey, this is strategic. I need to understand what this is. I need to be aligned with the rest of leadership. This is my goal. And I need to be able to say, hey, we're off course. We need you to correct course, because we can't do that, right? And I understand that. So, but I need to be able in constant communication with the people that can.
Mm-hmm. So that makes you the ultimate servant leader. When you are in accounting, you are stewarding the ship as the servant leader of every department to make
Yeah,
sure that they're all on the same page. I mean,
sure.
it's as a controller and the co-pilot that you mentioned earlier, like you're walking right beside them to make sure that you stay in line. So again, all the team, you said that they don't need to know.
It's a thing. I wouldn't necessarily say we have to keep them in line. We can keep
Okay.
them in line. So
Sure.
words matter. Words matter.
Sure, sure, sure. Yep, you're sure. So in that, every team member doesn't need to know everything going on in the company, but as we talked about, that they should know what the direction of the company is, where the goals are, what the BHAG is, that big hairy audacious goal, so that they can all be working towards it.
Sure.
I don't know where that started. Jason found that big hairy audacious goal. So from there were milestones that each department had, and then we would all work towards that per your department, but you didn't
Sure.
need to know everything going on in another department unless it affected what you were doing. But accounting is always involved, because we'll always have to come to
Yeah.
them to get
The
yeah,
numbers always go somewhere. That's right. So
yeah. So you're saying leaders who understand finance, they lead with predictability and not panic.
sure.
Yeah.
I
So then
like that.
heading into 2026, what must manufacturing leaders understand about finance that they probably don't yet?
Well, I would say the ones that do already do, right? So ones that are being successful already understand that. And the business leaders within manufacturing, they they have to understand that they need to be buddy buddy with your controller, right? Or your CFO or whatever your lead function of that is, right? So I would say that if a business leader, I talk to our business leaders on a regular basis, right? But if you're not involving finance in if it's, hey, let me, I did this, oh, let me go see what this is after I've already made this decision, and they're not pulling you in, then it's likely that they're missing that, right? There's one of two things happening there. Either you don't have a strong financial leader because the financial leader isn't providing you the information that you need, so they're bypassing them, or that leader is not seeing the value that finance can provide for them,
Mhm.
right? So I don't. It's just a mismatch between the two, but it's more along the lines of understanding that the right business, the right finance and accounting leader can provide you that information, and if
Mhm.
they're not, then I don't want to say necessarily don't have the right finance accounting leader, but maybe they need to be pushed in a different direction, right?
Mhm.
So, but I would say that that's important. That absolutely CFO, controlling role, depending on how large your organization is, they should be asking these questions and wanting to gain that knowledge. And if you were a business leader that was out there and you don't see them wanting to be involved within that,
Mhm.
um, that you should start either bringing them in or asking them and saying, hey, what are your thoughts on this?
Mhm.
And really pull them into that conversation and say, and give them specific things. Hey, do this. Hey, I need this. Pull that person in, right? Because a business leader's job is not to just, run the business. They're supposed to help develop that person as well.
Right. Well, and they have a specific set of talents that they were hired for. And
Sure.
it's a position in finance where it's not supposed to be one that says no all the time, right? It's a stewarding of all of the company. If it's a good
Right.
decision, to going forward. You can make whatever decision you want as a founder, but to make one that's the right one for the company to move forward so that it grows is the best. And that should be the finances job, to be able to look at all the numbers to see how the company's growing. There's a book called Top Grading, and they need that seat on the bus is very valuable. It talks about the different seats on the bus, and you were saying that if they're not doing that, maybe that's not the right thing for them. They
Well,
need to learn it, develop it,
I don't
or
want to
they
get
need
anyone fired today.
right. Yeah. Well, if you fire someone today after this episode, please don't tell
Not
us.
me. Yeah, right. Sure. Sure.
Right. Don't tell us. But if you need to hire someone, maybe we can lean you into someone. We probably have a top voice on the team that we could be able to refer.
Sure. Sure.
Okay. So one of my last questions before we end today is, if every manufacturing leader understood one thing about accounting beyond the numbers, what would change tomorrow?
Say that again. If they understood one thing.
If they understood one thing about accounting beyond the numbers,
Uh-huh.
what would change tomorrow? So we're not trying to get anyone fired. We're actually trying to give them advice on developing them. How could they be able to do it better beyond the numbers? What is and I would say one example right off the top that you had mentioned is building the relationship with each department leader. What's something else that could be able to help them?
To help the leaders within finance. I would
Hmm.
say outside of the numbers, utilizing that person, not just in a relationship, but from a strategic standpoint. I would say if somebody's in a CFO or controller role, they've been through a lot, right? So they know, the levers that sit behind that. So that person that's in that position, if you're mulling something over, um, absolutely get their advice because they're going to be able to give you a different view. So they have a lot of knowledge because of the work that they've done previous to that position, hopefully, to put them into that position. As long as they're well qualified, right? And you're not just putting somebody in a controller role that has, 2 years experience and is 24 years old. Not that a 24-year-old can't do that, but at the end of the day, with that base of knowledge, HR, I mean, there are so many things from a, project standpoint that I have been a part of, that I've seen, that gives you so much business acumen, because not only do you see the things that happen, you see the numbers that sit behind it.
Hmm.
So if you just said, hey, I'm thinking about this, what do you think? Finance CFO going to be able to ask a lot of questions back. Now, it might not sway your decision, and ultimately you might do this, but at least you'll go in knowing the risks that are associated. Controllers should not, right, like you said, always say no. We are not no people. We are calculated risk. So, yes, you can do this. If it goes wrong, this is what it'll cost. Here's
Hmm.
what your risk is. Is it low, medium, high, right? Those types of things.
Hmm.
So I would say that's what I would say. If any large decision, really go in. Doesn't have to be a numbers thing. Just go in and get a gut feeling from your CFO. They should be able to tell pretty much off the bat, because they're going to ask the right questions, or they should, as long
Hmm.
as they're good leaders.
Hmm. They have the right seat on the bus.
That's right.
So we're gonna wrap up here, and I'm really appreciative of you giving this kind of information, because accounting is not something that we talk about a lot, and it's like really the core of how the business is going to go forward, right? You have to have money, or it's a hobby. We discussed that.
Sure.
What do you talk about in your newsletter that we can share with our viewers here? Accounting
Uh,
Hero.
Generally, within my newsletter, I mean, that is a hobby. So I'm not, what was it called? Monetizing LinkedIn for
Mhm.
that. So it's a hobby. But within my accounting newsletter, The Accounting Hero, I go through different topics to really dive deeper into some of the topics that we've kind of been, going through. But pulling in, data from supporting um, publications, Forbes, I don't know, Harvard Business Review, those types of things, really pulling in things so that I can explain concepts from an accounting perspective, but putting it in business terms so that we're not into all of the details and stuff like that, kind of simplifying some of these accounting concepts.
Okay. Well, for those of you that are here and this is of value to you, please, I invite you to go and follow Robert. We also repost it in our Top Voices Unite page. Thank you so much for coming today, Robert. I appreciate this time that we had to be able to interact. And is there anything lastly that you'd like to tell our audience before we
Yeah,
go on?
sure. You should definitely go to where Nikki's at, because where I'm at, it's like 45 degrees, and I love the
Yeah.
palm trees that sit behind that. No, no, I think, like you said, servant leadership, absolutely, wherever you sit, serve people first. It will produce the largest benefit for you.
Yes. Great. All right. Well, thank you for those that attended today. We appreciate it. Thank you, Annalie, for producing our episode. And we look forward to next month, where we'll be talking about emerging voices and ideas that scale. We are transforming people's brands by creating this impact, giving them one more place to have visibility and credibility. Thanks so much for coming. Have a great day.
Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you.